Si tu savais comme on s'ennuie à la manée.
It's rare that a hydroelectric dam is impressive enough to inspire poetry. But here in Quebec, the Manic 5 Dam is an exception.
Tu m'écrirais bien plus souvent à la manie qu'ouragan.
It's become fodder for folk music, like this Georges d'Or classic from 1966. Even today, people come from out of town seeking it specifically.
C'est un emblème québécois, dans le fond. Ça représente une grande réussite pour le Québec, là, je pense, là, avec l'hydroélectrique. Puis c'est impressionnant à voir, là, c'est un beau mur.
But the dam was constructed in 1959 on ancestral Innu territory belonging to the members of Pessamit, 250 kilometers from the dam. It was at this time of year that the Innu prepared to mark the August 15th celebrations, a time when the community's hunters headed into the bush for a 10-month excursion. For many, this period of time seems far away today.
J'ai 52. Oh, yeah.
For Cécile Bacon, it was bingo night at home with family, a far cry from her upbringing on the territory.
I used to look forward to going out onto the land when I tell my children about it. I tell them how I used to put on my best clothing to head out.
This spot is where they were heading, the final destination after a month-long voyage by canoe, navigating local waterways.
Umashatan was the name of the Manic 5 site in Innu. Umashatan was the name of the portage trail to reach the lake where I live. The lake itself had the name Shinapgon. It was a very large lake where several Innu lived.
Adélard Benjamin works in territorial and resource management for Pessamit. He points out how it's difficult to ignore the influence of Innu culture on local toponymy. For example, the name of the reservoir, Manicouagan, is an Innu word, taken from Menequan, a specific word used to describe an Innu who sips water from the tip of his oar.
Le Québec s'est enrichi de nos rivières.
Quebec's enriched itself through our rivers. We can even say it's the cash cow of Quebec. All those hydroelectric dams, but we don't benefit at all from them. Not a cent of the profits.
Benjamin feels the Innu are inexistent to Hydro-Quebec, noting that Hydro's commemorative plaques and reference material make no mention of the families who once occupied the lands.
All of those reservoirs, rivers, they were the highways that brought us all the way to our territories, all the way to the Kanakasa.
Pessamit and Hydro-Quebec are working to correct these historical oversights, and despite the strain of her nomadic childhood, Cécile Bacon looks back on it fondly, summing up her relationship with Hydro-Quebec in one sentence.
It is what it is, but I'm still paying for it today. But I'm well lit, at least.
Coming up, we'll take a look at the history of the agreements between Hydro-Quebec and the Innu Nation, and what reparations, if any, are to come.
Now, today's episode is going to be on dams. And the truth about dams that nobody really wants to talk about. And that science and environmentalists, especially geologists, started warning about. Once this explosion of the idea of making power from holding back water. The push for this green agenda has consolidated mass amounts of corporations which have infiltrated the school systems, which we've talked about before, and this deals with the whole idea that carbon is bad. Instead of talking about the reality, the truth, the science behind this emissions propaganda, there's a lot more contaminants that come out of combustion engines that are far worse than carbon. And plants that emit water vapor produce 10 times the amount of greenhouse gases, because water vapor is 1,000 times more of a greenhouse gas than carbon. But one thing that everybody's kind of forgetting about is, are we dealing with the removal of one for a actual better, greener world? Or are we removing one in order for a new generation of wealth to destroy nature in the process of gaining more power? That's the truth of what's going on. Now, this hydro dams, the destruction on nature from hydro dams is by far exceedingly worse than that of carbon emissions. We're learning over time how to purify the emissions. Catalytic converters are a great example of that. It's not just the carbon they remove, there's other contaminants as well. Now, when it comes to dams, there is no science being brought into the methane emissions that are created from a dam, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. Let alone the vast amount of usable land that is flooded, which affects migratory patterns of not just birds and fish, but mammals, bears, deer, rabbits, turtles, frogs, everything. And the disease, the cesspool of this flooded area, stopping the environment from its natural purification of the waters. Now, a lot of Indigenous don't have clean drinking water. Why? Why is the water bad? We're going to dabble on that as well. Let's just start off here.
In November of 2019, for a third year in a row, land and water protectors from across Canada came to the US to spread the word about the damage to rivers and communities caused by megadams, and to show why hydro dams are falsely being portrayed as clean, green, and renewable energy for the US. Their mission is to stop new megadams and transmission corridors and restore the natural order of their rivers and communities that have depended on these lands for a millennia.
I am offering tobacco to the river, asking for forgiveness for that they did not know what they were doing to the river. And by that, I'm going to be doing it in my language.
The group came to Augusta, Maine, to the site of the former Edwards Dam, which was removed 20 years ago in order to restore it to its natural state, to, in part, get inspiration and hope of removing their own dams.
So when the time comes, this tobacco is going to go down this river, and it's going to carry that peace.
There are hundreds of megadams across Canada that have been exporting hydropower from large dams to the US, and they, alongside with transmission line corporations, falsely claim that this is clean, green energy. In Labrador on the Grand River, the new Muskrat Falls hydropower is planned for export as well. And in 2009, Hydro-Quebec started building its Romaine complex of megadams to produce hydropower for export. The La Grande Dam drains 68,000 square miles. That's twice the area of Maine. The group are here to explain how decades of studies show that megadams cause unacceptable methylmercury poisoning of Indigenous people.
These large dams produce a lot of methylmercury. There's naturally occurring mercury in vegetation, and when it's flooded, when reservoirs are flooded, when it's submerged in water, that mercury gets released as methylmercury. It's a harmful neurotoxin, and it builds up in our food web. Already, people in our community have higher than average mercury levels. So our baseline is starting at higher, and now they're adding the second dam, and they're trying to add a third.
For over 100 years, megadams across Canada have caused cultural genocide by flooding Indigenous lands. Rivers are their highways, traveled on by canoes, dog sleds, and skidoos. And because they must rely on wild-caught foods, people still practice these traditional ways, even if it's dangerous.
People have to drive through rapids
to get to their camp, their fishing areas, their hunting areas. I've lost a grandfather because of the rising and lowering of these waters.
So when you have a first layer of ice, there's a second layer of ice. Underneath there's water flowing. And when you travel with your skidoo, you don't know where that is because it's covered with snow. Your navigation skills as an elder have changed because you don't know where those waters now, where they used to be before Manitoba Hydro came along or before Quebec.
You know, I expect at some point I'll have grandchildren. I'm thinking about them and being able to make sure that they can go out and hunt and fish still.
I lived in a very pristine area. The water was very clean, the way I saw it. My granddaughter will not ever see that.
We head back to the dam site to speak with Steve Brook about the importance of dam removal and how it's brought Maine waters back to their natural states, and why it's so important for Canada to do the same.
This dam blocked the migration of all of the fish that come in from the ocean that need to reproduce in fresh water. But the fish that have come back, they're the river herring, the Atlantic sturgeon, the American shad, the blueback herring, the alewife. And this is a story I hope will be of help and of hope. They too can remove the dam at the proper time.
So what they're getting at, what they're trying to get across is something that I learned years ago. Now, of course, I'm a bit of a nerd, so bear with me. I'm going to try and put this in layman's terms. The rains come down. They hit the surface. It permeates the surface down. It goes through all different types of aggregates, all different types of sands and soils. And through that, each layer has a process in which it either collects the things it needs and lets go of the things it doesn't. It also holds back minerals and stuff. Now, starting from, the surface layer all the way down, you've got the plants and all the rest of it. You have all of this microbial growth, all of these different types of living organisms. Now, anybody who's a gardener would understand this. That first substrate is holding on to the things it needs and allowing the stuff it doesn't in order to pass. The next layer does the same thing, the next layer, the next layer, the next layer. This purification process goes all the way down. And it ends up that by the time the water has ran off of the surface, has been absorbed by all of these different layers, the excess water that comes out the bottom is almost pure water. Now, if you take this entire area, now you got to remember, dams deal geographically. They're taking an area that has the highest amount of a ridgeline with, so they can hold the highest volume of water. The more water volume, the more powerful the dam can be. The longer lasting this dam can generate this power. All of that life has been snuffed out. And now all of that is slowly decomposing. First problem. The microbes needed, the enzymes, the bacteria, all of this life can't live. It's flooded. So the process of it being broken down has been eliminated. Now you have huge death in the bottoms of all of these reservoirs. Now, not only that, you have now flooded all of these different layers of filtration for vast miles. Where do the contaminants go? They can't go anywhere. They start to build up. As they're building up in there, and as the sun is beating down and warming it, it's working as a sterilization. It's killing and not allowing anything to grow. Because the water isn't running, There's no regurgitation. There's no obstruction. There's nothing in order to allow that water to bang and absorb water or oxygen. The water becomes dead, making it more soluble for contaminants. Now the dam is opening up and allowing this concoction of all of these different types of contaminants that can't be purified because you've stopped the purification process. And it then bleeds that down into the rivers and streams that once used to be cleaned and flowed and fed with contaminated water. Because the restriction of the water is cut down, the contaminants don't get washed away. They slowly build up along the riverbeds, slowly taking more and more and more and more of the riverbeds and poisoning them. All of the species, from what live beneath the surface to in the water to above the water, all drinking, feeding, and living off it, slowly become poisoned. That's why most of the water around all of these reserves, all of these tribal nations, are unfit to drink. They never get those flash floods needed to wash away and clean the residual sediments that happen through the dry part of fall. They've completely destroyed not only the ecosystem of the area flooded, but everything downstream and everything upstream. Nobody likes talking about this because they're supposed to be the green way forward. Dams have done more damage to nature than oil and gas has ever done. Nobody's talking about this. It's simple. It makes sense. If you've ever been out in the bush, do you drink from a beaver dam? No. The water's bad. This is a tribal thing handed down from generation to generation to generation. You learn where to drink. You drink from running water. Dead water is death. We're going to move on. And we're just going to keep diving a little bit deeper. But first, let's just break this down a little wee bit.
Ah, a tall, cold glass of water. Now, imagine salt, sand, motor oil, and some raw sewage mixed in. Not so refreshing anymore, huh? Luckily, something in nature is working to ensure your tall, cold glass of water is just tall and cold.
A watershed collects water, helps to clean the water, and it moves the water downstream and provides all sorts of habitats both for nature and people.
Watersheds are nature's filtration system, and its work starts long before we turn on the tap.
A healthy watershed has lots of places for rain to sink into the soil. That could be forests, it could be grasslands, it can be farms. And during a rainstorm, the rain falls down, it sinks into the soil, it moves through the soil, and eventually ends up in rivers and streams.
Almost everyone in the world lives in and is connected to a watershed. Your backyard, the street you live on, even the park you play in is part of a watershed.
So having a healthy watershed benefits us in just about every way there is. First of all, clean water is incredibly important for watering our crops. 70% of all fresh water that's used by people is used to irrigate everything that we eat. The second is that's where our drinking water comes from. The cleaner our water is, the better it is for us, the cheaper it is for us to buy that water as well. And third, it's important because there's all sorts of reasons we love clean water. We love to get out and canoe in it, fish in it, swim in it. So a healthy watershed is just a wonderful thing to be able to have.
Now,
this is a salmon cannon. Its purpose is to shoot fish upriver. Really cool, but like, why? Well, because of this. Dams are not great for the environment around them, because putting a wall up in the middle of a river tends to disrupt the ecosystem, including, of course, the migration of salmon. So, is there something that we can do about it? Yes, and I'll give you a hint. Man-made dams have been around for thousands of years, and some of those are still in use today. They've helped with flood control, irrigation, drinking water, and making electricity. Today, hydroelectric energy creates about 16% of the world's electricity, and over 70% of the world's renewable energy, which is great, much better than burning coal. But as more and more dams were built to do good in the world, more and more people started to take notice of their negative impact on the environment.
When dams were initially being created, they were really seen as modern miracles in some ways. But as dams were constructed, we often didn't think about the impacts that were going to happen to the health of our rivers and to our fisheries. And it really wasn't until we went through a very large dam construction era in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s that we began to see cumulatively the impacts that dams were having throughout California and throughout the West.
When you disrupt the flow of a river, there are so many negative consequences to the surrounding ecosystem that it's just hard to fit it all into one video. So trees rely on the flow to redistribute seeds. If you lessen the flow of water, it increases the water temperature, which is terrible to the health of plants and animals. If you hold water back by dams, that water becomes toxic or it'll lose oxygen, both of which are not good when that water is eventually released. Dams also stop the flow of sediment downriver, which is, again, a huge problem.
By capturing water that would normally be flowing downstream, it changes the timing and the size of those flows. And all the fish and wildlife that live in rivers has co-evolved to that natural pattern. And a dam changes that natural pattern. So now the system doesn't function like it used to.
And maybe the most glaring problem with dams is that it affects fish, specifically how the fish are able to navigate their home to do something that's pretty important: reproduce. And the poster fish for that dam damage might just be salmon.
Salmon have evolved to survive using this same natural pattern that rivers have, with their high flows in the winter and their low flows in the summertime. Dams have been constructed fairly low down in a river and often end up blocking the ability of fish to move upstream and access some of that habitat that they need to reproduce.
Salmon populations have been declining for decades, and many experts point to the installation of dams as being one of the major contributing factors to this. So, over the years, people have tried to work on solutions. Maybe you remember that salmon cannon that we started off with? That was just one example of something to help the fish get upstream to spawn. There's fish ladders, fish elevators, and let's see that one more time again, fish cannons. But even though they're trying to help, it's still not the perfect solution. So, if fish ladders and elevators and cannons aren't the answer, then what is?
A dam never lasts forever. And so you have a situation where there's no longer a need for the dam, and the cost of maintaining it is so high that it actually begins to make sense to take that dam out and to have a lot of the ecological benefits that would come from dam removal.
Now, how do you remove a dam? It's not always explosions, even though that is the most visually appealing. It actually takes a lot of work, a lot of planning, research, permits, surveys, and just taking it down in a way that doesn't harm the environment even more. But it does happen. It's actually happened a lot. In the US alone, over 1,200 dams have been removed, and that helps restore the rivers that they were impacting.
One of the most successful dam removal projects that's occurred recently has been on the Elwha. The removal of the dam has opened up so much important salmon habitat that's really helped populations to improve.
Prior to dam removal, this area we're standing in was underwater. I am from Port Angeles, Washington, and I'm a member of the Lower Elwha Clallam tribe. I grew up with the Elwha River in my backyard. Sometimes literally, before the dams were removed, occasionally the river would flood into our backyards. So the removal of the Elwha Dam began in 2011, and since that time, the landscape has changed so much where the former reservoirs once were. So you can see where it gets rocky. That is the edge, that's the water line where the lake used to be. We now have trees growing in, we have animals that have returned to the landscape.
The removal of the Elwha Dam is the biggest dam removal project in history, and also one of the biggest river rehabilitation success stories.
And by restoring the vegetation, we are restoring the habitat for other wildlife to move back in. And so we know that wildlife play a role in the environment. We know that they can transport seeds and restructure the plant communities and also alter water flow. The first year, 2014, we saw very little beaver activity. By 2016, the beavers had discovered both lake beds and were using both habitats. They had figured it out.
But behind the clean energy narrative lies a series of ecological and environmental trade-offs. The biggest issue? Ecosystem disruption. When dams are built, they flood vast areas of land, turning rivers into reservoirs. This can displace communities, drown forests, farmland, and wildlife habitats, and disrupt the natural flow of sediment and nutrients downstream. Rivers support complex ecosystems. Damming them can block the migration of fish species like salmon, disrupt aquatic food chains, and alter water temperatures, sometimes making rivers unlivable for native species. Then there's methane emissions. Yes, methane from hydropower. In tropical climates, flooded vegetation and organic matter in reservoirs decompose without oxygen, producing methane, a greenhouse gas over 25 times more potent than CO2. Studies show that some large reservoirs may emit more methane than fossil fuel plants producing the same amount of energy.
Did you hear that? Now this is where bot scientists are the ones not saying anything, and real eco-scientists, real people who are trying to find funding, have been screaming at the top of their lungs. The amount of methane produced from these dams is like completely off the charts. Where's mainstream? Oh, don't want to go against that whole green initiative. Can't change the fundamental lies that they've been telling for generations. This whole push to so-called green energy, right? Oh, carbon bad. The gas of life is bad. We're going to build more dams. This is Carney's intent. This is how they make their money. We're going to go ahead a little wee bit further here.
Today, there are roughly 60,000 large dams around the world. 3,700 more are currently planned or under construction. Over 500 of them will be built in protected areas. At first sight, the concept of hydropower is a simple one. Flowing water is trapped in front of dams, then directed through turbines which spin to generate electricity. It may seem like a green solution to meeting the world's growing electricity demand, but it's actually a dirty one. Dams emit greenhouse gases, endanger fish species, and can uproot communities. So all this leads us to the question, what is the true cost of hydropower? To understand the environmental impact of hydropower, we first have to understand the value and characteristics of a free-flowing river. In a wild river, animals such as migratory fish can swim up and downstream at will.
At will.
Groundwater and aquifers naturally refresh the water. Silt and other natural materials can move along freely. The water moves out onto the floodplain in harmony with the seasons, delivering important nutrients to wildlife and other habitats, signaling fish to spawn and bringing nutrients back into the river itself. The sad news is that there aren't many wild rivers left. 2/3 of them are already dammed.
Did you hear that? 2/3 are already dammed.
And that number is increasing every day. What started with old-fashioned water wheels has developed into modern hydroelectric plants embedded in dams to generate power. Currently, 22% of the world's electricity is provided by renewable resources, 73% of which is hydropower. But although hydropower is renewable, it isn't green. Building a large barrier like a dam destroys the single most important thing about a river, its flow. Both the reduced downstream flow and the reservoir upstream can destroy wildlife habitats and farmland, either through drying out or flooding. A dam also changes the structure of a river. It slows the flow of water, which means that sediments like sand or gravel hit the dam and then drop to the riverbed. In a way, dams are thus creating big underwater sandboxes, and these are bad news for fish which depend on clean, rocky bottoms. The clustered sediments aren't good for the dam itself either, because as the area in front of it is filled up with more and more sediment, it holds less and less water. Dams don't just form a barrier for sediment, but also mean a drastic impact on flora and fauna. When the flow of a river is blocked, fish can't reach their spawning grounds. And over time, dammed rivers can lead to drastically reduced fish populations. Currently, the most common way of solving this migration problem is installing fish ladders. Fish ladders are stepped pools which allow fish to swim or jump from one pool to another all the way up and behind the dam. But in most cases, they don't actually work very well. The structures are often too high or too steep, too small to support massive migrations, or not able to hold enough water. Even if fish ladders do succeed, they might work for fish like salmon, but not for all types of fish, because some, like eels, can't jump. Blocked migration routes aren't the only problem. Reservoir water usually contains an excess of algae or other aquatic weeds, which can crowd out other animal and plant life. The water in reservoirs is typically also low in dissolved oxygen and colder than normal river water. When this water is released from time to time, it can have a bad impact on wildlife. As a result of all these negative consequences, worldwide populations of freshwater species have already experienced a staggering 83% decline since 1970. More dams will likely further deplete their numbers. Despite all these aspects, there's a popular consent that hydropower is a vital element for the energy industry's shift away from fossils. But one fundamental piece of information is missing from the argument. It might sound counterintuitive at first, but hydropower is not emission-free. Around 10% of the world's hydropower facilities emit as many greenhouse gases as conventional fossil-fueled power plants. Some existing dams in the lowland Amazon...
Now, did you hear that? Listen again.
...of the world's hydropower facilities emit as many greenhouse gases as conventional fossil-fueled power plants.
10% produce more than all fossil-fueled power plants. Tell me once again how this energy is green. Now, if you go by their calculations, because the only thing that's bad is carbon, then yes, these dams are good, even though they put off CO2 as well. But they're not adding all of the math. This is how they've been getting away with these lies. Nobody wants to talk about this. I was fortunate to have some pretty damn good teachers and to be very inquisitive. I knew this at a very young age. And then because I'm a nature fanatic, because we'll like to say, I try to live off the land, and seeing all of these rivers slowly becoming poisoned, and watching more and more Indigenous communities losing their clean water, my curiosity was piqued. I started doing research on this decades ago, looking into why. And the whole time, 1 by 1 by, and all of a sudden 10 by 10, and then 100 by 100, and then 1,000 by 1,000 rivers and lakes became undrinkable. Why? And it didn't take a pile of research to grab maps and find dams. Dams here, dams there. We're dammed everywhere. This is a global catastrophe nobody wants to talk about. And like I said, the voices that are trying to speak aren't getting funding because they're not backed by billionaires who are using this for corporate interest. It's all about the money.
Some existing dams in the lowland Amazon have even been shown to be up to 10 times more carbon intensive than coal-fired power plants.
Did you get that? In the Amazon yet?
Generating power by spinning turbines with water doesn't directly emit greenhouse gases. So where do they come from? When reservoirs cover organic matter like dead plants, trees, fields, and farmland, they produce greenhouse gases, especially in warm climates. The organic material breaks down and releases gases like carbon dioxide and methane into the reservoir water. And these are the two major greenhouse gases associated with climate change. Worldwide, the rotting vegetation in reservoirs represents 1.3% of the total annual global emissions caused by humans. This is alarming, but it also shows that there's potential to improve the current situation.
Now, let's just move ahead a little wee bit and deal with something else that happens with dams.
Nancy, I am Chief Larson Anderson from the Norway House Cree Nation, and I am speaking to you today about the continuing threat to our First Nation. Since 8-mile and 2-mile channels were constructed in the 70s by Manitoba Hydro, our nation has experienced many issues. These channels were dug in soft soils and peat and were designed to increase the flow of water from Lake Winnipeg and into Manitoba Hydro's generating system. 2-mile channel was designed to take 20% of the flow, but now accommodates most of the water flow into Playgreen Lake. These channels allow continuing erosion, which negatively affects my treaty rights of fishing and trapping. It also affects our economy, water navigation, and safe access to our traditional lands. The damage is not just continuing, but it is accelerating uncontrollably and devastating local fish habitat. There is no clear information provided to all First Nations, including Norway House, on the effects of the sediments. Fishers have noticed islands being created in parts of the lake from all of the sediment.
My name is Loretta Mowat. I'm the environmental coordinator at Norway House Cree Nation. I'm also co-chair person of the Norway House Resource Management Board. Lake Winnipeg regulation was a major undertaking with numerous serious impacts from day one to current day. Changes that occurred after the opening of the channels include changes to our local water regime, our lake bottoms, beaches and shorelines, wetlands. All of these changes, of course, affect our fish and fish habitat, wildlife, including our small game animals that live along the shoreline.
Now, you have to remember something as well. Now, combine all this information together. All of the wells, all of the other tributaries have now been poisoned from this standing water. The water level has been raised. And because it's raised, the natural bed of water, the natural water table, has been elevated with it. So, of course, with that comes erosion, because now it's above the sedimentary value, and it's within the microbial part, the softer, the peat, the rich land that feeds all of the trees, the grasses, the birds, the animals, the humans. All of this is slowly saturating, and it's leaching all of the mercury, all of these poisons that aren't being filtered. They're being slowly migrating within and permeated within all of these vast amounts of standing land. So yes, you're getting erosion, but you're also slowly bringing these toxins in to what was once clean areas. Now trees aren't getting the proper nutrients because way far down in that microbial bacteria rich part of the soils that helped at one time purify and hold the good nutrients needed and minerals needed to feed the grasses and the trees are gone. And poisons are being brought in. There is no aeration. They're starving the root systems of all of these plants. And slowly over time, it permeates deeper and deeper and deeper within the land. Next thing you know, the little wee pools of water that once held all of the contaminants that were washed off of the shore, and in each rain it would fill and it would purify, and it would fill and it would purify, can't purify any more. All of those toxins that were normally washed off through Mother Nature are now sitting, and they begin leaching. It's a domino effect, and it starts stretching further and further and further on land. So the dam isn't just poisoning that small body of water. It's poisoning every day a little more and a little more of the land of all the people who live around it. Science don't lie. Politicians and billionaires do.
And these changes have affected the ability of Indigenous communities to exercise their traditional activities.
Good day. My name is Christopher Clark. I'm a commercial fisherman, trapper, hunter, resource user. I'll speak from a commercial fisher point of view there. I've witnessed erosion year in, year out, right from on the Lake Winnipeg side right into Playgreen side. We've noticed a small island forming with the silt and sand coming in from Lake Winnipeg. It's approximately half a kilometer east from Pangus Point. But what the erosion has drastically done to our fishery is our fishery has been decimated. This erosion has drastically damaged the well-being of our people, you know. The way we live, the way we conduct our traditional activities now, we can no longer do the things we used to do, but somehow we have to slow down the Lake Winnipeg water regulation control has caused.
Now, this erosion is a major, major part, but it's only talked about because it's seen. It is something that is visually there, whereas you don't see the microbes. You don't see how worms can't function in flooded dirt. What happens when it rains? They all come to the surface. It'll flood them out, it'll drown them. That is another key indicator. But slowly, as these dams fill and the water tables rise, the worms are migrating to a safer area. So it's not something that all of a sudden, boom, you're going to see, because the time it takes for these dams to slowly fill. And they're in a race right now. They're in this so-called green race to try and stop fossil fuels and that very horrible carbon. By the way, we're carbon-based. Just food for thought. In order to do this for the so-called benefit of humanity, which we've already talked about, the very first clip showed, the value doesn't go to the people it should. The value goes to the shareholders. And then they're saying, oh, well, don't worry, we're giving you green electricity. Sure you are. What about the damages? Why is nobody talking about the damages?
However, this project comes at a significant environmental and social cost to create the reservoir.
This is Site C Dam.
That will feed Site C, a substantial area of land will be flooded. Approximately 5,500 hectares of land will be submerged. This land includes not only forested areas, but also fertile agricultural land, critical ecosystems, and wildlife habitats.
And there you can see in the background the actual flooding that is occurring right now. They've had the Site C Dam now blocking the Peace River for 2 weeks. The halfway river is now a lake, and it goes way up into the ravines, way back up in here now. So there's another new lake. And just to show you what it's looking like back here. So
now, Bear Flat, the reason I picked this video on the Site C, Bear Flat is given its name for what it is. It was a narrow part of the channel where during certain seasons, lots of bears used to migrate. And it was a feeding ground for bears. I'm sure a lot of you have seen those fabulous pictures in nature where the bears are actually, jumping up and grabbing the fish as they're jumping out of the water, and this amazing beauty of nature. Well, this was a major part of that. And what makes that so fertile is kind of like what happened through BC. The bears would catch fish, they bring them to the shore, they eat what they like, the rest decomposes, and it enriches all of the dirts and soils. As well as, when flooding seasons hit, all of the sediments and stuff get disrupted and get lifted up, and then they slowly get deposited along the surfaces, making this stretch one of the most fertile areas within Peace River Valley.
Of the lake, or the river itself, which is now becoming a lake, is 3 or 4 times the size it was.
3 or 4 times the size it was already. And this is 7 months. This video was recorded 7 months ago. So you can imagine how much more of this has already been flooded. And now imagine how narrow that little piece would have been, which is why the bear would go there and cross. Not only was it a feeding area, it was a breeding area, and it was a migratory area, which they are now removing. What happens to the bears? Oh, but it's all good. It's all good because we're doing this to save humanity from carbon. Right.
So all this farmer field is all being flooded now. There's not happy campers. This is about 35-40 kilometers above the dam, and the flooding will continue a good 45-50 kilometers above this as well.
The dam's construction will flood roughly 83 kilometers of the Peace River and several of its tributaries, transforming their part of the landscape permanently. For many, the flooding represents more than just the loss of land. Indigenous communities, including the West Moberly and the Prophet River First Nations, have long opposed the project. The land is to be submerged holds deep cultural, spiritual, historical significance. It includes areas used for hunting, fishing, and gathering, all of which have been integral in Indigenous ways of life for generations. Legal challenges have been mounted by the First Nations, asserting that the Site C violates their treaty rights and threatens their traditional practices. Furthermore, agricultural advocates and environmentalists have raised concerns. The Peace River Valley is home to some of the most fertile farmland in the province, and its loss is a point of contention. This region has the potential to support significant food production
and the impact on both local and provincial agriculture is a major point of criticism. Additionally, environmentalists have pointed to the ecological damage. The flooding will destroy forests, wetlands, and riverine ecosystems that support various species, some of which are already at risk. Despite the concerns, the project has continued to move forward, and as of now, it's estimated that Site C Dam has cost around $16 billion. The budget has ballooned from initial estimates, sparking further controversy. While some argue that the dam represents a critical investment in the province's future, others maintain that the economic, environmental, and social costs outweigh the benefits. The Site C project was expected to be completed by 2025, but is already filling the reserve as of September of 2024. The power generation schedule will begin shortly thereafter. Once operational, it will provide long-term, low-cost energy for the region. But the legacy of Site C, its construction, opposition, and profound transformation it brings to the land will remain a significant chapter in British Columbia's history.
Yeah, is it really a benefit? Is it really a benefit? Have we not seen the damage that goes on? And this has gone right across Canada and the world.
It's a cultural genocide that's happening in Labrador because of the actions of this project.
The controversial hydro project at Muskrat Falls has sparked fear, protests, outrage.
This was a story that had to be told.
Dozens of people face charges.
It's going to wipe out my traditional food as an Inuit person. And for me to be told that I can't protest that, that is injustice.
The colonial legal system says to me that my way of life is illegal.
But we're dealing with a corporation that has singled out a journalist, is targeting a journalist.
You hurt me! Many Innu and Inuit say reconciliation and sunny ways are nowhere to be seen.
Has singled out a journalist.
Now, yes, they have singled out the journalists because mainstream won't talk about this. It's propaganda. That's their job. Hydro dams are good. You've heard it all about all of this Muskrat Falls in the news. They've been just pumping it up on how great it is that they finally got together and they've got it running, even though it's billions of dollars over budget that tax dollars paid for. They're not talking about everything that I brought forward in the past 50 minutes. None of this comes up. And I love the way that she says this.
Targeting a journalist.
You hurt me! Many Innu and Inuit say reconciliation and sunny ways are nowhere to be seen.
And sunny ways. Sunny ways. Don't worry, Canada just elected the General of Sunny Ways.
In the shadow of the dam.
If there was reconciliation, I wouldn't have gone to prison.
Exactly. She wouldn't have gone to prison. How many out there knew? How many out there knew that Indigenous and regular Canadians who were protesting this were arrested and thrown in jail and charged and then hushed up and told to hush up? And journalists weren't giving the time of day. They were being pushed and prosecuted. Nobody's talking about it. And how far are we going to let this go? How far are we going to go?
Pare com essa violência que vocês estão fazendo.
Representatives of Amazon tribes crossed the Atlantic to protest alongside environmental activists in front of the London office of the Brazilian Development Bank, which is providing funding for the Belo Monte hydroelectric dam project. They fear the dam will permanently change their way of life in the rainforests of Brazil.
The dam is going to put enormous pressure on our land and forest. The indigenous people near the dam will be especially affected. This is a question not only for my people, but for all the indigenous people in the Amazon and in the whole world.
And in the whole world.
The area in question is in the heart of Brazil on the Xingu River, a tributary of the Amazon. The river is home to more species of fish than are found in all of Europe.
Did you hear that? More species of fish than found in the whole of Europe. They don't care. They don't care. This green zealot religion, they don't care. They're brainwashed.
It plays a key role in the life of dozens of Indigenous tribes.
It does play a key role in a dozen Indigenous wives. It's getting out of control. And then you have to contend with all of these other countries and other things that come up with dams.
But this over-exploitation of our great mountain ranges has come with a price. Both the eastern and western Himalayan regions in India are one of the world's most thickly populated mountain regions. They are also part of a seismically active zone. Disasters linked to hydropower projects in the Himalayan region have become more frequent in recent years. The latest example of this can be seen in Uttarakhand's Joshimath town, where more than 800 buildings have developed cracks due to subsidence, where one of the reasons for this was the ongoing Tapovan-Vishnugarh hydropower project.
Now what happens is that the land starts to stretch because of all of this hydro pressure being put along the walls of these valleys. So all the people who thought and were talked into by the government, oh no, we'll just move you up and we'll pay for this and we'll get you and we'll resettle you up further. All of that land has become unusable. You can't grow on it because it's poisoned from all the leaching coming on from this body of water. But it's also applying huge amounts of pressure, constantly moving and changing, causing it to be unbuildable. Absolutely unbuildable. And then you have the lies that are brainwashed into the people.
This is the Neretvetsa River, winding through forests, villages and farmlands of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Its fresh water carries rich biodiversity and endangered species of fish. Tomato and raspberry plantations line its fertile banks. Most people here depend on the river for their livelihoods. But they say a planned construction of 15 hydroelectric plants is threatening to cut off the main lifeline of the valley.
There are more than 35 to 40 hamlets here, and people live there. These people live by the streams and by the rivers. There isn't a hamlet here that isn't connected to a stream or river, which is normal. If they take these streams and this river, we'll have to leave.
For people like Haditza, leaving is not an option.
They will never build here. I will not give them my property. They will not pass over the piece of land that goes from here to the river. I'm ready to fight at the price of being defeated.
Environmental.
And they lost, by the way. They lost. The companies won because they control the media. They silenced the people, and big business moved on to create these dams for their carbon credit system. And now on to the brainwashing. This is what's happened to Canada. It's just now you get to see it in real time.
Chants of resistance from the Amazon, 150 indigenous people from 5 different tribes going into day 8 of an occupation of a work area at the Belo Monte Dam construction site. They say promises made to them by the builders and the government have yet to be fulfilled.
We would not be here today if the company and the government would have done what they promised to us. In my community, nothing has been done. There is no quality health post, there is no school, they have not built a road for us. My road is the river, and that's going to be dried up.
And they say they're being affected in other ways as well.
Now, did you hear what he said? And this is what I meant by brainwashed. This deals with what the natives in Canada have been dealing with. The Indigenous. I mean, sure, okay, well, no, don't worry. We're going to build you schools. We're going to give you, hospitals, and we're going to give you roads. And this is all beneficial as well for the rest of Canadians. Everybody's going to benefit from all of this. In the meantime, what they're not seeing is all of the science that's been coming out in the last 20 years about how all of the land has now been poisoned. All of the downstream has been poisoned. all of the upstream has been poisoned. The damages that are being done. But here they are, they're being convinced by the government, and they'll be happy. They'll settle. They'll settle, just like what happened in Canada 40 and 60 years ago. Oh, no. Okay, you're going to give us schools, and you're going to give us hospitals, and you're going to build roads, and this is good because it's also going to help out Canada, the rest of Canada. Yeah, this is real good. What about all of the poisoning? What about all of the desiccation that's happening because of these dams? These people aren't there yet. And they're incredibly remote. Some of these villages, they don't know what a cell phone is. They shoot bow and arrow at planes that go overhead because they have no idea what the heck that is. This is how Canada was generations ago. And nobody's learning because mainstream media isn't talking about this. They don't want you to. And who controls that mainstream media? Well, let's just take a close look at something. This is a very simple way to go around it. This is Brookfield Renewable. These, the green and the orange and the yellow, are dam projects they're working on. The one that we're pertaining to, in which there's massive lawsuits going on, goes to here. And now, it's only to one, and it's not that big of an area. Really? Well, let's take a closer look at it. So now it's a series of dams that is flooding how many? 5,000 hectares of land? This is going to affect 20,000 different people within the first dam area. What happens when they start backdamming? And then backdamming some more? And then this is all going to end up tying into, yes, the Amazon River. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody's talking about it. Why? Why is nobody talking about it? Now, if you were to look carefully, you have to see why the push is being made. So now Brookfield even labels it right down in here. And if you just scroll right down, you get to see the Brazilian market is divided into free market environment, deregulated, and regulated market environment. The deregulated market generates traders and consumers freely agree energy contracts. Usually the power purchase agreement, PPA, term varies between 3 and 5 years with physical delivery. In the regulated market, generators sell energy in long-term contracts, give or take 20 years, through auctions managed by the government. The power costs are passed directly to the end users who are not able to participate in the deregulated market. Now, of course, who do you think is winning all these auctions? Usually the governments that are the most corrupt. And who did Canada just elect as their new prime minister? Yes, the most corrupt man possible when it comes to forcing the carbon credit system on the world. This is their goal. Now, how do I prove I bought renewable power? This is a fascinating little keynote I have to make sure everybody's aware of. In Brazil, most of the generations sold to regulated market is renewable. There is still no market to trade RECs, which is Renewable Energy Certificate, or GOOs, Guarantees of Origin. However, all power plants are defined as renewable, or not by the government in their Authorization Act. How are RECs, Renewable Energy Certificates, procured? The REC market is still in development. In Brazil, there is no historical data to define it yet. Now, they like using these big words that they sound like they mean one thing, but they actually are completely contrary to it. So are renewable purchase agreements, PPAs, available? Yes. Are green tariffs available? No. Interesting. They sound kind of like these really green initiatives. Well, let's break that down. Okay, so the green tariff is also known as green pricing plan or green electricity program, is a utility service that allows customers to support renewable energy by paying a premium on their electricity bill. This premium helps utilities invest in and acquire renewable energy resources like solar, wind, hydro, and biomass at a higher rate than conventional power generation. Add that to the government helping make legislation. Previous episodes, people. This is the takeover. This is literally the death of the planet. Way more so than any carbon-emitting, nasty, natural gas could ever possibly do, which I've already proven in this episode. And I just want to give you all a reminder, by the way, let us not forget this part.
What is Mark Carney's record on Indigenous rights? Before becoming Liberal leader, Carney was an executive at Brookfield. The firm is a major investor in the renewable energy sector, and that's occasionally brought it into conflict with Indigenous peoples.
The impact of these dams, historically, they did have quite a large impact.
Brookfield Renewable owns 4 dams on the traditional territory of Mississauga First Nation. Brookfield bought them from Ontario in 2002, and the First Nations sued both of them in 2022. The chief says the projects have had a devastating impact, and their lawyer says they only sued as a last resort after Brookfield refused to negotiate a benefit-sharing agreement.
Brookfield shut the door in our face. If we had been able to reach an agreement, an accommodation agreement with them, which is common for new projects, then we may not have ended up in court at all.
From 2020 to 2025, Carney was vice chair, then chair at Brookfield Asset Management, which owns Brookfield Renewable. He was mandated to focus on, quote, both generating profit and saving the planet, according to the Globe and Mail. In 2022, Brookfield and its businesses faced reports of human rights abuses in Brazil. NGO Global Witness even accused Carney of hypocrisy for allegedly offloading farms implicated in tropical deforestation.
Now again, previous episodes where I exposed Carney about this and broke a whole bunch of stories that other independents ended up following, which I'm glad they did. I'm glad that the news got out. This is why I always say, please like, share, and subscribe. The only way we're going to get past and break the bubble of propaganda is if the information is shared so others have the availability to actually get it and watch it. And as always, I post all my links in the description. So anybody who thinks, well, this guy's a bit of a quack, can actually go and see, oh, wow, these are real scientists. This is real documentation. This stuff is real. I back it all. I have to do a pile of fact checking. I've been working on this for almost 3 weeks, just this one episode. I couldn't tell you how many hours it took to put all of this footage so it's more entertaining rather than me sitting here reading scientific journals. Let's continue with Carney's hypocrisy.
Brookfield also faced Indigenous resistance in Colombia in 2022. Here, the Wayuu Nation protested against a Brookfield-owned wind farm. Then there was an environmental dispute in Maine where dams were allegedly killing endangered Atlantic salmon and threatening tribal fishing rights. For its part...
Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I broke a heck of a lot more than that. This guy, we're talking about even roads. Yes, roads. There are at least 4 different places where roads have been purchased by Brookfield or a subsidiary, because they like to do that. These big companies love having little companies, and then not only do they shell off money and hide taxes and all the rest of that, but they use these little companies to take the brunt force of it so that the big company name isn't exposed. One place in particular is literally cut off at least 500 different tribal areas, towns, villages, and communities, because you have to pay a tax to use that road now. A tax. And the tax that they have to pay is equal or proportionate to 1 year's earning to these people. Canada is not a third world country, although the post-national push is definitely trying to urge us that way. But now you have somebody who has the highest seat of power, who is part of a party that has already been stripping away the rights and freedoms of people, which again, previous episodes, this comes down to the point where if you don't believe with what we say, like a fascist would say, then we're not going to give you charitable status. Look at all of the different churches. If you're pro-life, you are an enemy of the state. We are going to tax you, and we're going to take away any ability for you to get any government grants because you're a nasty person. These are just small things. And now, all of these Indigenous groups, some of them are waking up and they're realizing, holy shit, these dams are way worse than what we thought. And we signed on the dotted line and we took the bribe because we didn't have the information at our fingertips in order for us to actually understand the true depth of damage that's being done. Hydro dams are choking our entire globe. Canada wants this to be our supposed energy superpower. I gave you all the facts. I gave you all the information. I gave all of the links you need in order to go down, and I urge you, go through all of these links and watch these videos in their full length. Listen to what they're saying. Some of them have a little bit of left leaning into them. I use them because of the facts. Where they from there, that's their opinion. My opinion is more of a centrist idea dealing with the actual science, the math, the reality. And then I always like to say you have to combine that with moral integrity. The moral integrity. This is what we don't see in mainstream. We don't see any of it. You will not get the truth. They will try to coax you away from your moral integrity. They will try to pit everybody against everybody. It's all propaganda pushing this green narrative. In the meantime, I am going to go out and make sure that I am still injecting the needed nasty gas of life in the greenhouse. And I'm going to make sure that I stir and mix my nutrient-rich piles that are going to become the natural fertilizer as they decompose and put them into my garden beds. I'm going to make sure that I, take all of my recycling in. I'm going to do all of the things that morally I've been doing forever. And I'm not going to listen to propaganda media try and tell me that what I'm doing is wrong. I'm sorry. Just the facts. Just the facts. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I hope you like, share, and subscribe. And if you are, make sure you punch that notification bell so you don't miss any future episodes. I am going to try and do, hopefully, every weekend, a special and kind of get away from the whole mainstream lies and propaganda and try to just bring together a bunch of really good information that's being suppressed so that my audience can have a good reality check. Something everybody, I believe, needs. Anyways, until the next time, I'm Alias to Guy. You've been watching the Canadian Citizen Journal. Stay informed.